True crime has always been a popular genre in nonfiction books, and with the rise of independent presses and self-publishing options, the publication of true crime books has only risen in recent years. Throw in a murder trial that riveted people nationwide, whether they were familiar with the region or not, and you'll find more ways to read about a case than you know what to do with. This is exactly what has happened in the case of Alex Murdaugh, the South Carolina attorney who was convicted of murdering his youngest son and wife in 2023. Not only was he convicted of those murders, but he was also embroiled in several financial crimes throughout most of his career, and every other week he seems to be back in the headlines. Today, I want to talk about a few things I learned after reading the book, The Devil at His Elbow, Alex Murdaugh and the Fall of a Southern Dynasty, which I couldn't put down, by the way. You might be surprised by a few of these things as well. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day. But all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Roberson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. I recently had the chance to read The Devil at His Elbow, Alex Murdaugh and the Fall of a Southern Dynasty. I'll be honest, when I first heard journalist Valerie Bauerlein had released this book, I thought, does there really need to be another book about this family out there? In episode 72 of this podcast, I shared my review of Blood on Their Hands, Murder, Corruption, and the Fall of the Murdaugh Dynasty by Mandy Matney. That book was a little bit different because while it was a work of nonfiction, it was also more of a memoir about journalist Mandy Matney and her life leading up to uncovering the corruption in the Murdaugh family, including working at the Island Packet in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. Bauerlein's book is different, and it became an instant New York Times bestseller. While it reads like a novel, it also dives deep into the lineage of the Murdaugh family, which began in South Carolina in the late 1800s. One of the passages that hooked me from the beginning was this one. Sudden exits had haunted the Murdaughs for more than a century. Suspicious accidents, unusual deaths, deaths that were faked, deaths rumored to be murders, death during childbirth, death on a battlefield, death during a quiet night at home, death by musket and shotgun and rifle, death by drowning, death on a dark road, death by stairs. Long before Alex was born, lethal violence was woven into his family's story, along with chicanery and infidelity and enough hubris for several Greek tragedies. Here's the official synopsis of the book. Alex Murdaugh was a benevolent dictator, the president of the South Carolina Trial Lawyers Association, a political boss, a part-time prosecutor, and a partner in his family's law firm. He was always ready with a favor, a drink, and an invitation to Moselle, his family's 1,700-acre hunting estate. The Murdaugh name ignited respect and fear for 100 miles. When he murdered his wife Maggie and son Paul at Moselle on a dark summer night, the fragile facade of Alex's world could no longer hold. His forefathers had covered up a midnight suicide at a remote railroad crossing, a bootlegging ring run from a courthouse, and the attempted murder of a pregnant lover. Alex, too, almost walked away from his unspeakable crimes with his reputation intact, but his downfall was secured by a twist of fate, some stray mistakes, and a fateful decision by an old friend who'd finally seen enough. Why would a man who had everything kill his wife and grown son? To unwind the roots of Alex's ruin, award-winning journalist Valerie Bauerlein reported not just from the courthouse every day, but also along the back roads and through the tidal marshes of South Carolina's Low Country. When the jurors made their pilgrimage to the crime scene, trying to envision Maggie and Paul's last moments, she walked right behind them, sensing the ghosts that haunt the Murdaughs' now shattered legacy. Through masterful research and cinematic writing, The Devil at His Elbow is a transporting journey through Alex's life, the night of the murders, and the investigation that culminated in a trial that held tens of millions spellbound. With her stunning insights and fearless instinct for the truth, Bauerlein uncovers layers of the Murdaugh murder case that have not been told. Valerie Bauerlein is a national reporter for the Wall Street Journal who writes about small-town America and Southern politics, economics, and culture. She has covered the South her entire career, including 19 years at the Journal and 4 years at the State in Columbia, South Carolina. She's a native of North Carolina and graduated from Duke University. She lives in Raleigh, North Carolina with her husband and their 2 children. I will add that Bauerlein covered the Murdaugh family for several years, including reporting on Alex's financial crimes and attending his murder trial daily, so the book is based on hundreds of hours of interviews with the people involved. The book starts out with a listing of the main characters discussed, which I appreciated. Then the opening chapters discuss the end of Alex Murdaugh's trial, and the reader then gets taken back in time to see where the dynasty began, with the life of Randolph Murdaugh Sr., who was born in 1887. I've often wondered why the Murdaugh family wanted to live in rural Hampton County for so many years, but the book does a good job of explaining how the Murdaughs, who resided in the upper echelon of Hampton County, likely wouldn't have had as much power and prestige in other parts of the state. Bauerlein also described how and why Hampton County was so ripe for personal injury lawsuits, which is where Alec made his money. She writes, "The Murdaughs shied away from taking on clients who had been injured inside the town's plastics factory, long the leading toxic emitter in the state. The family didn't like to sue companies close to home. The preference was to go after big out-of-town corporations." Describing Alec, she says, "He was the kind of guy who could, in the course of a day, score some pills, cheat on his long-suffering wife, fix 3 different court cases in 3 different counties, head to Hampton's Little League fields to coach one of his son's teams, and then host the after-party for players' families." There were some parts of the book that I already knew a lot about, including the chapters on Mallory Beach's death, the boat crash at Archer's Creek, and Stephen Smith's still unsolved murder. That's probably because I've watched all the documentaries on the Murdaugh family up to this point. There is a very chilling quote in chapter 36, where Anthony Cook's mother Beverly says she woke up in the middle of the night with Mallory's voice in her head. The deceased 19-year-old was saying, "They all think the dark, black waters took me, but I need them to see. The dark, black secrets needed me. To set them all free, it took me." I also knew a good bit about the investigation into Alex Murdaugh's financial crimes. The book shares details about the personal injury clients Alex stole from, and a lot of the reporting covered things I hadn't heard before, including details from the Murdaugh housekeeper Gloria Satterfield's death. But I didn't follow the actual trial of Maggie's and Paul's murders very closely, so I was surprised to learn several different incriminating details from that. What I want to discuss today is 5 new things I learned about the Murdaugh family after reading The Devil at His Elbow. A warning, if you haven't read the book, this episode may contain some spoilers, so please be advised on that if you're interested in checking out the book. Here's the first thing I learned. The Murdaughs' home before Moselle, located on Holly Street in Hampton, South Carolina, caught fire in July 2009. In 2009, their home on Holly Street caught fire while the family was out of town at their home on Edisto Island. Firefighters were able to extinguish it quickly, but it appeared someone had poured diesel fuel throughout the house and then set fire to a backdoor floor mat. An article that ran in the Bluffton News the next day read, "Local and state police are still searching for a suspect in connection with an apparent arson attempt at the home of a local attorney. Firefighters responded to a reported structure fire at the home of Alex Murdaugh at 515 Holly Street Extension around 7:30 Friday morning. While the fire was quickly extinguished, evidence at the scene has prompted an arson investigation," said Hampton Police Chief Perry McElhaney. "We suspect that sometime Thursday night or Friday morning, someone spread some kind of accelerant around the house and tried to set it on fire from the back door," said McElhaney. "Luckily, for some reason, it didn't spread through the house, and the only thing that burned was the floor mat." The family filed charges against a contractor who had done some work for the Murdaughs, but he never stood trial. After the fire, Alec refinanced the Holly Street house with a no-money down loan and valued the house at $500,000, which was a lot more than its previous value. I have to wonder if this arson, that conveniently occurred while the Murdaughs were away at their beach house, was another attempt by Murdaugh to work the system and receive an infusion of cash from an insurance settlement. Number 2. The Murdaugh family sued a railroad after Randolph Murdaugh Sr. staged an accident and caused his own death. Alex Murdaugh's great-grandfather, Randolph Murdaugh Sr., allegedly took his life by driving onto the railroad tracks at a desolate crossing near a country cemetery in the early morning hours of July 19, 1940. He was 53 years old and had been in bad health for years with heart and kidney troubles. He was the first member of the family to attend law school at the University of South Carolina and elected the 14th Circuit Solicitor. He was the founder of the Murdaugh law firm. An article that ran in the state newspaper the day after his death read, Randolph Murdaugh Sr., one of the most respected citizens of Hampton County, was killed instantly near Varnville early this morning when a train and his car collided at a crossing of the Charleston and Western Carolina Railway Company. He was returning home after visiting a friend. Bauerlein's book expands on that night, writing that Randolph Sr. was leaving a poker game at a friend's house, which included a lot of whiskey consumption. The railroad crossing didn't have any lights or signal arms because it wasn't a main crossing and was out in a remote part of the county. He knew the train schedule. He drove up onto the middle of the tracks, leaned out his open car window, and waved into the train's headlight. The train engineer saw him, but it was too late to do anything but strike the car. He would later recount that it did not look like a distressed wave, but a friendly one. Randolph Sr.'s body was found beside the tracks with a broken back and crushed skull. His death was ruled an accident, and the family sued the railroad for $100,000, which would be about $2 million today. However, people in town talked. They knew Randolph Sr. would not have gone over that railroad crossing on his usual route home. How was it an accident if the engineer saw him accelerating onto the tracks at the same time the train approached? Randolph Sr. knew the railroad budgeted money for settlements as part of their operating expenses. The money the family won helped Randolph Sr.'s son, Buster Murdaugh, who was then 25, establish his place in the legal community of Hampton and the cash to get the family dynasty started. Before we continue, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. It's wintertime. I don't know about you, but my skin is always in desperate need of moisture during this time of year. And, well, in the other months of the year too, if I'm to be honest. But I don't like to experiment with a lot of different products at high price points if they won't work for me. Enter the products from SkinX Erin. I use her Pre-Cleanse Oil, Hydrating Beauty Oil, and Perfecting Night Oil, and I was hooked from the first drop. The Pre-Cleanse gently removes dirt, impurities, and even waterproof makeup without tugging, all without stripping or drying out your skin. In addition to keeping your skin clear, it also helps your skin feel firmer and reduces the signs of aging. The Hydrating Beauty Oil is a powerful and effective skin hydrator that never leaves your skin feeling greasy. The signature squalene oil is known for its anti-inflammatory and anti-aging properties. It's perfect for treating skin conditions like acne and eczema and reducing the appearance of wrinkles. The Perfecting Night Oil is loaded with vitamins E and A and is rich with antioxidants and omegas that nourish skin, replenish elasticity, and reduces stretch marks. A few drops a day leave skin smoother, more vibrant, and youthful. Want to try out the products for yourself? Go to shopxerin.com and use the code MissingCarolinas10 for a 10% discount on your order. Are you looking to level up your writing or learn a new skill? Whether you focus on nonfiction or are more inclined to creative writing or want to learn how to put together a digital portfolio of your writing, Wow Women on Writing can help. Interested in podcasting? Check out a digital course I created called You Can Start a Podcast. During this pre-recorded webinar, you will learn the benefits of creating your own podcast, materials you need to get started, how to develop content that will keep listeners coming back for more, and ways your podcast can create supplemental income. I'll share examples of different types of podcasts, how to decide on a format, ways to handle the technology necessary for creating a podcast, how to develop your first few episodes, promotion and monetization ideas, and ways you can repurpose your podcast content. All written materials and resources are provided by me. I'll also give you a handout with information discussed in the webinar, along with suggestions for a few different types of podcasts to explore. Best of all, this webinar only costs $30. You can find it by going to wow-womenonwriting.com and clicking on the Classroom tab. I'll also post a link in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the show. Here's the third thing I learned about the Murdaugh family while reading Valerie Bauerlein's book. Number 3. The Murdaughs were involved in another boat crash. In 1998, The Murdaugh family was also involved in another boat crash. Alex's younger brother, John Marvin, had thrown a party out on a family property called Murdaugh Island, and the guests grabbed their beer and had it out in a boat on the Broad River. John Marvin was with friends in another boat. While the first boat on a stretch known as Hazard Creek, the boat hit something under the water, got stuck for a moment, and then continued on. Within a few seconds, the passengers realized someone had gone overboard. They found the passenger in knee-deep water, bleeding from his face. The group brought the injured man back on board and headed for a nearby marina. They saw John Marvin in his boat, and he headed to the marina with them. Despite 2 boats full of people who had been drinking on the water, and one person who was later determined to have been run over by a boat, an officer with the Department of Natural Resources drove John Marvin and his guests back to Murdaugh Island. Allegedly, John Marvin coached the group on what to say, and it was more than a month before the victim had recovered well enough to talk with an agent. The driver of the boat was only fined for having too few life preservers on the boat. Number 4. The Murdaugh men had a long history of stepping out on their wives and controlling them financially. Randolph Sr.'s first wife, Etta Causey Harvey, died of sepsis just a few weeks after giving birth to their second son. A year later, he married Estelle Marvin Murdaugh, a distant relative. But when she was 46, Estelle was admitted to a sanatorium in Walterboro. She died 6 months later, and her cause of death was listed as preeclampsia. She also had arthritis and pneumatic fever. It was not clear if she was pregnant at the time of her death, and it seems to have been kept under wraps if she was. 4 days after Estelle died, Randolph Sr. married his third wife, Mary J. Taylor Hoffman, a woman 15 years his junior and the daughter of a state senator. They had apparently been an item for some time. Randolph Buster Murdaugh, Alex's grandfather, was married to a woman named Gladys, who he met in college, but he was also well known for stepping out on her. In fact, he fathered a son with another woman named Ruth Evan Vaux, who was married to a local plantation owner. Even after Ruth Evan Vaux visited the Murdaugh home with her son, Gladys refused to allow the boys to meet and said often, "Murdaughs don't divorce." The 2 boys later became close and worked alongside one another as attorneys. Like his father and grandfather before him, Randolph Murdaugh III, Alex's father, also enjoyed the company of women other than his wife Libby. He even moved in temporarily with a stripper from Hilton Head for a time, leaving his wife alone with their 4 children. This was around the time that an obituary for Libby Murdaugh mysteriously appeared in the state newspaper. Libby was alive and well, and stunned by the publication of the obituary. Some people believe she had published the notice herself, while others speculated Randolph III had done it to remind his wife that he still maintained all the power in their relationship, no matter how he behaved. Here's what the obituary, which ran on November 18, 1976, said. Civic church leader Mrs. Murdaugh dies. Mrs. Elizabeth A. Murdaugh, wife of Fourth Circuit Assistant Solicitor Randolph Murdaugh III, died Wednesday at her home. Born in Columbia and a former resident of Brunson, she was the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. M.D. Alexander of Brunson. She received the B.S. degree from Columbia College, where she was one of 10 outstanding seniors, and was named Who's Who among students in American universities and colleges. She taught school for 2 years in Lexington County before moving to Varnville in 1964, when her husband began practicing law. She also taught in the Hampton County schools for 7 years and was recently appointed by Governor James B. Edwards as a member of the Children's Foster Care Review Board. At the time of her death, she served as vice president of the Hampton County Country Club and was a counselor of the Hampton-Varnville Methodist Youth Fellowship. She was a member of Varnville United Methodist Church and Varnville PTA. Surviving are her husband, her parents, a daughter, Lynn Murdaugh of the home, 3 sons, Randy, Alec, and John Marvin Murdaugh of the home, a sister, Mrs. L.A. Janet Cotter of Columbia, a brother, Dr. M. Don Alexander of El Paso, Texas, maternal grandmother, Mrs. Blanche Jones of Beaufort, 3 nephews, and a niece. Plans will be announced by Peoples Holland Funeral Home of Hampton. As we all know, Libby Murdaugh did not die in 1976. In fact, Alec told police he had been visiting his mother, who was battling dementia, the night Maggie and Paul were murdered. She didn't die until March 19, 2024, almost 3 years after their deaths. Alec followed in his family's footsteps of cheating on his wife, Maggie, according to The Devil at His Elbow. According to sources interviewed in the book, Alec had multiple mistresses throughout his marriage to Maggie, and one of them was even present at Moselle, at the wake following Maggie and Paul's funerals. Number 5. The Murdaughs' history of being involved in bootlegging. Chapter 8 of The Devil at His Elbow discusses how Randolph Buster Murdaugh, Alec's grandfather, worked as both the solicitor of the 14th Circuit and a senior partner of the Murdaugh law firm. He was also running what some described as South Carolina's largest bootlegging ring. He had law enforcement officers and other community members on his payroll, but in the summer of 1956, federal agents with the Department of Justice figured out who was running the stills in the state and leveled charges. Buster was one of the men charged. As you can imagine, Buster Murdaugh found a way to manipulate the trial, even though it was held at the federal courthouse in downtown Charleston. It's a fascinating look at the bootlegging industry in the South in the 1920s and how some of the most powerful men running it were in law enforcement themselves. It once again reiterates how and why Alec Murdaugh believed he and his family were above the law, because for generations, they had been. Alec Murdaugh was convicted of murdering Maggie and Paul Murdaugh after a 6-week trial, but the South Carolina Supreme Court has agreed to hear an appeal by Alec's attorneys in his case. An article that ran on CNN reported they had filed a motion last July requesting a new trial based on allegations that Becky Hill, the Colleton County Clerk of Court, tampered with the jury by making comments to jurors implying Murdaugh was guilty. Hill resigned from her position after the trial and after quickly publishing a book about her experience working at the trial, titled Behind the Doors of Justice. She is under investigation in the state of South Carolina for numerous ethics violations and accusations she used her professional position for personal gain. This past week, the Post and Courier in Charleston reported that a federal judge signed off on a $14.8 million judgment against Alec Murdaugh for his role in filing a bogus insurance claim and stealing millions of dollars from the estate of his former housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield. Alec's insurance company, Arizona-based Nautilus, filed a federal lawsuit against Alec and his co-conspirators in April of 2022. If you'll recall, Alec told Satterfield's son to sue him for wrongful death after their mother's death at the home. Instead of giving them the money from the settlement, which would have helped them cover Satterfield's medical bills and help them live after the loss of her income, he pocketed most of the $4 million settlement. By the way, learning how the Murdaughs lived in their day-to-day life and how little they paid their housekeepers was an eye-opening part of the book. They couldn't even be bothered to do their own laundry or rinse their dishes after eating. The housekeeper would cook them dinner before she left at the end of the day and had to clean up the dishes from the night before at the start of her next shift. She was also not paid for vacation or medical insurance. This recent $14.8 million judgment will never see the light of the day because the South Carolina court system took control of Murdaugh's assets in November of 2021. They divided up that money to help pay back the many victims of his financial fraud. Other books about the Murdaugh family include Tangled Vines, Power, Privilege, and the Murdaugh Family by John Glatt, Swamp Kings, The Story of the Murdaugh Family of South Carolina and a Century of Backwoods Power by Jason Ryan, Blood on Their Hands, Murder, Corruption, and the Fall of the Murdaugh Dynasty by Mandy Matney, and The Fall of the House of Murdaugh by Michael DeWitt. One of the jurors from the trial, Myra Catherine Crosby, who infamously became known as the Egg Lady, has published Because Enough is Enough, tell-all book how juror 785 was wrongly kicked off the Alec Murdaugh jury. I have only read the 2 books by Valerie Bauerlein and Mandy Matney, so I can't give any honest reviews of the others. This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd also like to support the show in a small way, you can buy me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com, Renee Roberson. Thank you so much to those who have already supported me through this platform. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like and subscribe to our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. Sound editing is provided by Daniel Roberson. Thanks so much for listening.